Welcome to Saturday Station Farm. I'm Randy, and today we're going to be discussing going over your butchering plans now. This video is geared for people that are planning on buying piglets, raising them on the farm or homestead, and then getting them processed at a commercial facility. If you're interested in butchering your own pigs on your own farm personally, then this isn't the video for you. You may find some of the considerations we go over in this series very helpful, but we won't be going into a full-scale breakdown in this video. So there's three things that we really want to touch on today. Number one, get your dates. Number two, research your processor. Know where your animals are going to go. And number three, we're going to discuss the differences between the USDA, state inspection, and custom processing. All right, so let's get down to it. All right, let's get started with the first thing. Get your dates together. You're basically going to need two dates. The first date is approximately when the sows are going to wean the piglets and when they'll be ready for you to take them home. The farmer should be able to tell you when the piglets are weaned, so you can calculate that into your planning. The next date we're going to look at is our processing date. That's the date we actually take our pigs to get processed. One of the biggest reasons for doing this whole video and for wanting to make sure you get your butcher dates first is that butcher shops and processors fill up in the fall heavily. Many processors already have regular clientele. They're processing pigs and beef, chickens, turkeys. Probably in your area they may be processing deer, bear, moose. Fall is a very busy time for butcher shops. Booking up to a year in advance is not uncommon at all, especially for those coveted fall spots. This will vary somewhat depending on where you live, but in general, folks buy their piglets in the spring, about the same time they buy their chicks, raise them through the summer when the weather is perfect, and then get them processed in the fall. If you wait too long, the processes could fill up, and you might not get a spot to get your pigs processed until late into winter. Standard heritage breed hogs are ready to butcher in about 6 months on average. 5 to 7 months of age is about perfect timing depending on how you're feeding them. If you're feeding free choice, unlimited feed all the time, you may find that they're at the perfect weight around 5 months. If you're limit feeding and kind of controlling their intake, you may find to get to that same weight that it stretches out to 7 months or so. In general, 6 months is a pretty good time frame. That way, even if you have some issues with feeding or with getting a spot at the butcher's, you've got some wiggle room there. The issue you can run into is this. After about 5 months of age, or around 150 pounds, somewhere in that neighborhood, the pig's metabolism is going to change on you. Their growth rate is going to slow down. Their energy demands are just not as high as they were before. So what can happen as they get older is their ratio of fat to muscle increases. They grow less muscle and more fat if they have an excess of calories. We all love fat in our cooking. Fat is phenomenal. However, there is too much of a good thing. Even a lean carcass hog is going to have plenty of fat, and probably more fat than most homesteads are going to be able to utilize. If you find yourself in a position where you had some lean hogs and you needed extra fat, odds are it's not going to be hard to find some from either the farmer you bought them from or from someone else that's raising pigs as well. This is important also. When you take your pigs to get processed, the butcher charges per hanging weight. So the more the pig weighs, the more they're going to charge you to get it processed. If you have an overly fat pig, you could be paying higher prices to get it butchered, but not necessarily having something of sustenance. You're not getting necessarily as much meat back, but you could be getting 20, 30, 40 pounds of fat. It's a lot of fat to go through. In general, 6-month window is a good time frame for folks. Once you have your weaning date, then you can calculate out to 6 months of age and then start calling your processors to find out what you can get for dates and get that spot reserved. You'll be glad you did. All right, so on to number 2, researching the processors that are in your area. Now that you know the approximate dates of when you're getting your piglets and when you're going to be able to get them processed, it's time to start looking for a butcher. You may be fortunate that you live in an area that has a lot of options, or you may be limited to just 1 or 2. Either way, make a list of all the butcher shops in your area. You can generally find a list of all the butcher shops in your area right from your state's Department of Agriculture. They should have a current listing of all licensed shops and whether they're USDA, state, or custom processors. And we'll get into that more in the next step. You may find that the only processors in your area are a couple of hours away or more. You want to find that out now, particularly if that's going to influence buying piglets. We want to find this stuff out now before we get too deep into an investment that we can't fully utilize. So, you've got a list now of all the shops in your area? Great. Give them all a call. You spent all this time, 6 months, raising these animals, taking care of them, tending to them every day, giving them sweets and treats, not to mention all the investment of time and money you've put into this for growing your homestead and the sustenance for your family. You don't just want to take your animals to some fly-by-night operation. You want to work with high-quality butchers and processors that are going to work with you and treat you right. So here's a few questions that you can ask when calling up these places to get a feel for them. So a couple of things to ask. Do they have availability when you want to get them processed? Can they provide you with cut sheets? And that's basically the sheet that they're going to use, that you're going to fill it out and they're going to use it to cut your pig up into the individual cuts exactly the way you want it. It's basically the directions of what you want done. Are the cut sheets intuitive? Can you understand what cuts they're referring to? You have a lot of pieces of meat that, depending on how they're cut up or cured or smoked or prepared, they become a different dish in the end. Real quick, we'll take the loin along the back of the pig. Well, that loin, if you slice it up, it becomes pork chops. If you were to cube it into 4 or 5 rib sections, you now have a loin roast, right? If you were to take all the bones out, you just take that loin and you cure it and smoke it, you now have Canadian bacon. Same cut of meat, prepared 3 different ways in 3 different products, all right? So when you get your cut sheet, does it make sense? If it doesn't make sense and you ask them to clarify it, are they helpful? That's really a big one. Customer service is such a huge issue. If you can't communicate with your processor, move on, honestly. You don't want to leave things up into interpretation because you're not going to get back what you want. How do they charge for their services? Now, you may just find that when they give you the cut sheet, all the information's already there. Typically what you'll find is you have a kill fee, and then you have a cut and wrap fee based on the total pounds of the animal when it's hanging. And then you have costs for extras like making bacon, smoking, curing, sometimes slicing, making sausages. A good processor is going to have all their information right up front. It's going to make your life much easier. We'll do a whole cut sheet video later on. Right now, we just want to get comfortable and find a great butcher to work with and get our dates. And then we've got all summer to work on getting our plans together of how we're going to get it processed. Can you visit the facilities? Some areas of the production facility may be off limits or just not available during high times of production. You know, they need to be working and they can't be having outside, unsanitized, dirty people coming through a processing area when they've already got a cleanliness and sanitation protocol in place. Usually during the winter, early spring, butcher shops can tend to be much slower than in the fall and the winter. So that could be a good time to go visit and take a look for yourself and see how they operate. That's exactly what I did when I started out 10 years ago. We narrowed down all of the possible processors in our area down to 4, and then we called them up and they all said, sure, come on over and take a look. So we did. Right off the bat, a couple shops, we just knew they were a no-go. You go inside, their knives were all dirty, there's blood stains on the floor where there shouldn't have been. There's something to be said for when you're busy and you're cranking and you're middle of production, but it's when you're slow season and your facility just looks grungy, you know, when you're trying to work with the people and ask them questions and they act like it's a waste of their time or you're bothering them. If you're getting that, it's probably best to just move on. Let your intuition be your guide. The other 2 shops we checked out, phenomenal. They actually took us on full tours of the facility, showed us around, actually gave us some samples so they could, so we could test and see how their bacon actually tasted, because they're salting it and they're curing it and smoking it. So they wanted to give us a representative sample. Super helpful with questions. That's what we're looking for. someone that we can work with, and especially where we're raising pigs for a long time, we want a long-term relationship. So that's what you're looking for. Those handful of things. You just want to get a sense that all your hard-earned work is going to be returned as you intended to be. All right? So never be afraid to ask questions. Reach out. If they're not willing to work with you, move on. Even if it means you have to travel farther to a better facility, it's going to be worth it in the long run. Your animals are going to be treated better, your product's going to be treated better, and you're going to be treated better. Everybody wins. All right? Let's go on to the next section. Number 3, let's just talk for a few minutes about the differences between a USDA licensed facility, a state licensed facility, and a custom exempt licensed facility. So let's start with the USDA. The USDA stands for the United States Department of Agriculture. They are the regulatory body that's responsible for overseeing and regulating processors, butcher shops, farms in general. Processing facilities create their own safety standards and sanitation programs, but it's the USDA overall that has guidelines and regulates and inspects and enforces to make sure that people are in compliance and safe food practices, basically. So at a USDA facility, when your pig goes in and it gets killed and it gets processed, there is a inspector, a USDA inspector, standing there watching the process happen. And they're following that animal through the process to make sure that the processor is following all its due process and standards. When you get your animals killed under USDA inspection, that product will come back with a sticker on it and a little license, be signed off that's been inspected. You can sell it as wholesale or retail. It can enter commerce and cross state lines. USDA processing tends to be the most expensive, usually due to the regulatory oversight and the additional paperwork that's involved with everything. There's just a higher cost of production. So USDA tends to be a little more expensive. So then we move on to state inspected facilities in your area. Remember, USDA is federal. They oversee the whole US. But every state has their own individual Department of Ag. So what many states are able to do, like here in Maine, our state of Maine is able to develop their own inspection program. Now, they can be more strict than the USDA, but they can't be more liberal. In general, though, state programs almost always just follow USDA recommendations and regulations. So just like a USDA inspected facility having a regulator on site watching the whole process, the same thing happens at the state level, except instead of having a federal regulator watching what's going on, you have a state-appointed regulator, inspector, watching the whole process to verify that the facility is in compliance with their safety standards and sanitation and what have you. So with a state-inspected product, that is legal for sale within the state it was processed. So if I go to a state-inspected facility here in Maine, and I get my pork chops back, and they've got a sticker on them saying it's all been licensed and inspected and passed, I can sell it, wholesale or retail, but only within the confines of our state. I can't ship that over state lines. I can't take it to another state and sell it. I can only sell it within the state. There's obviously some variation here, but in general, it seems that state-inspected facilities tend to be just a hair cheaper than the feds. Finally, we have custom exempt processing. Now that's probably what most of you are going to be looking at. Custom processing is basically me as an individual taking my animal to get processed to a butcher. They're going to cut it up, they're going to package it how I want, they're going to give it back to me, and it's for personal use. When you get it back, you're going to have a sticker on your meats labeling what it is, but it'll also have a little sticker that'll say, not for sale. The custom exempt facilities are available so that individuals can get their products processed for their own personal use. You can give it to friends, give it to family, fill your freezer up, that kind of thing. Almost all the wild game processors in your area that are doing deer, bear, moose, they're all custom exempt. When you go onto your state's Department of Ag, they'll probably have a list of all your USDA facilities, maybe just a few. Then you'll probably have more state facilities, and then even more custom facilities. So a custom exempt shop still has to have the same rough regulatory framework They have to have sanitation plans in place. So they have to have safety plans in place. They have to have their standards in place for how they're going to kill the animals, how they're going to store everything. The only difference is there's no appointed inspector constantly watching the process. They will stop in once in a while to check on these shops and just make sure that their paperwork's in compliance and they're doing what they said they were going to do, but they're not there all the time. But there's a lot of great custom shops out there, so don't let, just because it's a custom shop and there's a lack of direct inspection, dissuade you, right? They still have a regulatory framework they have to work within. And if they're worth their salt whatsoever, they're going to be doing a good job. Good businesses stick around. Many USDA inspected facilities and state inspected facilities will also offer custom processing, like the processor that we use. Because I'm selling my products all over the place, I use a USDA inspected facility. So if I bring pigs up there, I'm not actually sure what the dates are. Monday through Wednesday, there's a federal inspector on board watching the whole process, and I get my products back and I can go sell them. Then they have 1 or 2 days, for instance, where there's no inspector, but individuals can bring their pigs up, get them processed. They're for personal use. So the same facility could be doing both. Custom processing tends to be the cheapest of all the processes. There's much less regulatory overhead, much less paperwork, less labels. Sometimes they're seasonal. So call around. It's another question you could ask when you're checking out the shops, like, what are my options for getting it processed? And what are the costs associated with it? Because you will see a difference between the 3 different facilities. So at the end of the day, most of us are going to be using a custom processor, but you may find that that custom processing is in a USDA facility or a state inspected facility. And if you decide to go with if all you got is a full USDA facility, nothing wrong with that. Might just cost you a little more, but you could also then sell your product if you want to afterwards. So there's some trade-offs there. Call around to all of them, see what's in your area, and start making those plans now. You don't want to wait till the last minute to try to be figuring all this stuff out. Do it now in the slow season before you get your piglets and get those ducks in a row. Thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'm here to help you out. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next time.